Good evening, and thank you all for joining this panel discussion called Is ROE the New ROI? As we discuss how marketing executives are evaluating campaigns beyond ROI to incorporate powerful metrics of engagement, emotion, and experience. My name is Esther Elkos, and I'm the chair of Career Development and Networking Programs at the American Marketing Association, New York. First of all, we would like to extend our appreciation to our media partner. Reuters Events guides leaders through innovations in strategy and technology, allowing them to capitalize on new opportunities and delivering the next generation of customer experience. We also appreciate our premier partner, Greenbook, a leading voice in the market research and consumer insight space, for supporting the AMA New York year-round. And last but not least, a big thanks to our board of directors and volunteers for their ongoing dedication and support behind the scenes to make events like this one happen. At AMA New York, we work every day to inspire, support, and celebrate brilliance in marketing. As a member, you have access to the most relevant knowledge base of data, tools, and people in the New York area. If you're not a member yet, I invite you to join this dynamic organization to access essential resources, expand your knowledge through a full schedule of events around marketing skills, career readiness, and emerging trends. Network among your peers and connect with leaders who shape the future of marketing, and elevate your leadership profile by volunteering, providing expertise, and mentoring. We offer a wide variety of programs, so make sure to subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media to stay tuned. As a recap of our upcoming events, on April 29, join our popular event, Cocktails in the Green Room, to network with marketers across the country. AMA chapter leaders from Boston, Houston, New York, New Jersey, and Madison will lead 10 breakout rooms for highly interactive conversations. On May 6, engage in a timely panel of experts to learn how successful healthcare brands have repositioned themselves to become more patient-centric and competitive. And on May 13, tune in and learn how to address urgent corporate sustainability issues facing the marketing and advertising industries, including brand safety initiatives. If you are interested in joining AMA New York, you can sign up on our website, and feel free to contact us if you have any questions regarding membership. Please feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself, let us know where you're joining us from, and also ask any questions to our panelists. And now it's my pleasure to present Laurel Mintz, our host, our moderator tonight, CEO and founder of the award-winning marketing agency Elevate My Brand. Laurel's background has uniquely prepared her to run a successful agency, inspired by the innovative consulting work she executed earlier in her career with prestigious brands. Laurel knew she wanted to play bigger. A decade later, Laurel has created an agency family serving both startups and blue-chip global brands like Facebook, Verizon Digital Media Group, Paw Patrol, and SanDisk. Laurel, please take it away.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I have done probably a dozen of these or so for Reuters, and I'm so grateful to them and the AMA for bringing me together with all of you. I live for these conversations, and today's conversation is going to be a really big one. It's a really important one because it's all about the human element of marketing. And ultimately, we are all people, and that is the conversation we are going to have today. Is ROE the new ROI? So before I introduce my amazing panel, we're going to throw up a poll because I want to know, do you even know what ROE is? It was something that was kind of new to us when we talked about it on the pre-panel conversation. So Esther, you guys are going to throw up the poll for us so we can see who knew what ROE was. So answer yes or no, please. And submit your answers. Also, let us know that you are here, you are engaged. Part of my favorite part of this conversation is making sure I'm answering and we are answering all of your questions. This is about you, not about us. So make sure to ask your questions and get everything that you need out of this amazing panel. We have 90 minutes. We've got a lot of time together. So we have a lot to cover. Let's start with a little bit of an introduction. And Esther, then whenever you get a chance, if you could just throw up the results, that would be great. And we can talk about that as well. So I'm going to start with Tim Rickards. Tim, take it away. Unmute, please. Yes.
There. No, I was not going to be the first one to talk while muted. So hi, everybody. Great to be here. My name is Tim Rickards. I'm a marketing director at Charles Schwab, and my team is focused in on client engagement, so retail brokerage client engagement. So something like ROE is naturally top of mind. We actually started to dig around in this space out of necessity and need a little bit before I understood that it was actually a thing. I did a little research before, and it is a thing, although it seems to be several meanings of the acronym. So from my perspective, and what I want to share with you guys today as we go through this is just how we think about trying to connect with clients over time with a topic, financial services, that really isn't someone's favorite thing often. I think sometimes polls have said it's about as fun as going to the dentist for most people, and B, something like dental floss, which you need to do in order to live a longer life and have good hygiene. You got to do it, may not be into it. How do we keep you engaged?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim. Already have some questions around in our head. It looked like 63% of people had no freaking clue what ROE is, which is probably why they're in this conversation with us today. So we hope to enlighten and inform. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Kai, to do your intro.
Yes, hello. Thanks for having me on the panel. I'm Kai Boschman. I work for International SOS. I'm based in London, UK. So I'm literally at my last cup of tea right now for the day. International SOS is a private healthcare firm with 11,000 employees. We do health and security advice for Fortune 500 companies, governments, and relief organizations. And we've been quite busy, like most of you probably, advising from travel restrictions to testing vaccines, to return to office, oil rig sites, etc. And hence, being in healthcare in this time, of course, ROE is quite important to us as an organization, and I'm really looking forward to discussing the subject with you all.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the work that you and your firm are doing. Such important work. And speaking of important work, Lynn, also doing really important work for the world. So if you could do a brief intro, that'd be great.
Yeah, hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Lynn Godfrey, and first I have to commend you, Kai. You've got to be. It must be 11 o'clock your time or something like that. You look very bright-eyed. So whatever you're doing is working for you. So. But as I said, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. We're a leading organization that focuses on eradicating blood cancer and providing innovative research, investment, a range and host of patient services and support, as well as legislative advocacy on behalf of blood cancer patients. Leukemia and lymphoma is just frankly two of the over 150 different types of blood cancers in the world. It's not as well known, but I will say it is the top 3 leading cause of cancer death. So it's pretty devastating in its impact. And I'm super excited to join this conversation. Like many of those who responded on the poll, I return on engagement certainly, but some other aspects of the framework and discussion were somewhat new to me. We hadn't formally coined these phrases, but working similarly to you, Kai, I'm sure you find this, working for a healthcare nonprofit organization that's patient-centric, emotion, experience, levels of engagement are absolutely at the core of what we're about and what we do. So looking forward to sharing my perspective and hearing from my other colleagues.
Powerhouse panel. This is exactly what I love to do. So for those of you who have just tuned in, we're starting to build up a big audience of participants here. Please ask your questions in the chat. I do a really good job of integrating them, if I do say so myself, into the conversation to make sure that your questions are getting answered. So I'm going to pose a question to all of you. Just make sure you are alive and with us. How do you measure marketing success within your organizations? We'd love to hear your answers in the chat. Let us know that you're with us and that you're excited about this conversation, because I am pumped. And as you do that, I'm going to ask our panel their first question, which is, why are people so desperate and seeking other ways to measure other than traditional ways. So anyone can pick this up. I see, Tim, that you unmuted, so I'm going to kick this over to you for one.
You got me. I was just getting prepared. Well, I mean, the first thing, I think if someone's searching for a thing, clearly they have a need. So we are trying to figure out a way to quantify what we do. I think even if you go back like 20, 30 years ago with advertising, I think people were bought in that you could quantify it. Now, yeah, maybe, I'm not sure. It seems a little bit of hocus pocus, dark arts. But as the digital transformation has continued, we're in this position where we are communicating with people on an untransactional basis, if you will, often. Content marketing, even just kind of brand impression, those are softer things. And I think in a lot of industries now too, especially something like finance or healthcare, or even I think, Lynn, with leukemia, it's the type of situation where you may be in need of what we're providing at a very specific moment in your life. And other than that, you might not be. So as the provider of information or services, how do we stay on top of it? How do we stay visible? And I think there aren't really good numbers. The last thing that comes to mind for me is that, you know, I think of traditional marketing as this huge kind of like giant mosh pit, right? There's all this work. We make campaigns, we make a bunch of widgets with the Keebler elves, and there's all this dust. And then the dust settles and we count. We throw a bunch of darts and we count the darts. And I think now it's an ongoing, it's not a mosh pit, it's an ongoing kind of a dance. And it's just a different way to gauge what's effective. And so people are looking for new processes, new ideas, and, you know, hopefully a better, not only a way to sell internally, but a better way to get gratification than what we're doing actually works and impacts people.
I think that's totally fair. I think it's that attribution modeling is shifting and changing, and that human element is becoming more and more important. Lynn, it looked like you had something to add to that.
Yeah, just to add to what Tim said, I think you also have the growing trend, and there's tons of research that shows that Gen Z and the younger generation behind them are increasingly really concerned about causes and making impact, and that human element, and make a lot of their decisions about purchases or brand decisions, brand loyalty decisions based on, you know, no longer it's just about your service or your product, but it's also about what do you stand for? What difference are you trying to make in the world? And so I think as a result of that, it's a really important, because that's one of those, in so many ways, as you mentioned, Tim, in intangibles. So our typical quantitative metrics only tell you one piece of the picture, only tell you one piece of what that consumer is really thinking. You know, you're basing it on a transactional action or behavior versus right. How are you possibly tapping into people's interests, passions, those motivators, totally. Which in some ways could be more compelling and stronger to drive loyalty down the road. So that's why I think people are looking for other ways to measure to success. I know for our organization, that's what we're looking to do as we think about cultivating long-term relationships with our various constituents and figuring out like what's the lifetime value of that constituent, which is always
it's so important. And I think that, you know, marketing as a whole, marketing has a lot of softer skills within it, right? Marketing is relationship building, not that transactional component that you mentioned, Lynn. So I find this to be a really refreshing conversation. Kai, did you have something to add as well?
Yeah, I completely agree, because I see it like a 360 around the marketing team, because we do it for ourselves, we do it for our clients, and we do it for the internal teams, commercial and management teams, for various reasons. So, for example, you need to speak the language of the board and the CEO and the commercial teams. So what can you give them? Because, as you said, marketing can come across sometimes very abstract. It's not 2 + 2 is 4. So how do you explain your decisions? Well, you do it through ROIs and ROEs, the new way of doing it. You also, in our case, for example, we are market leader and there's an expectation that we are always the first out of the block, that we raise the standards for the entire sector that we are leading, and that we invent the next iteration. And that means my marketing needs to be the best in the sector, and I need to find new ways of defining it. And it allows us to stand out of the crowd, because there is a lot of choice these days. So how do you measure? How do you stand out?
I think that's all so totally fair. I do want to call out the audience. We only had 2 people respond to how you're currently measuring your marketing goals. And I think that I'm calling BS on that, guys. Come on, let us know how you measure so we can respond to you and let you know how ROE is going to affect your existing measurement techniques. There we go. So people are asking me, how do you measure ROE? We'll get to that. Perfect. Getting some questions in there. This is what I like to see. So let's back up and let's define each of these categories. What is return on engagement, return on emotion, and return on experience? Anyone would like to take this? You can go ahead, Lynn. Maybe you want to start. You can pick either of the 3: return on engagement, return on emotion, or return on experience, and share with the audience your definition.
Oh gosh. Okay. I'm gonna go with emotion. And
Go
out
for
of
it.
the 3, I chose emotion because when you think of a person's affiliation with a brand and organization, it begins with an emotional reaction. You love it, hate it, whatever the case may be. It's oftentimes that intangible, but you know that the relationship that you have with the brand is emotionally driven and centered. So to me, return on emotion is, oh gosh, how are you connecting with your audience that taps into those interests, motivators, inspires, I mean, really causes someone to stick with you through thick and thin. And that almost is bigger than just, I don't want to make it about price or what have you. Like, what makes someone choose to drive an additional 5 miles out of their way, for example, to go to a particular coffee place or to a Trader Joe's or something versus the supermarket across the street. It's that that feeling of satisfaction that you're giving to that audience or to that consumer that can't be replicated elsewhere. And it's because of that sense of satisfaction and emotion that then causes you to take whatever actions you're going to take. So again, being at LLS and the fact that we support blood cancer patients who are clearly dealing with the most devastating disease that perhaps they've ever encountered in their life. It's all about the emotion and providing a sense of comfort, support, a guiding hand, a calm in the midst of chaos, a whole host of things. We have found that, or I have seen the impact which connecting with various audiences, either patients themselves and or helping donors and volunteers see the emotional toll of cancer by elevating those stories, how that can have in terms of their long-term relationship with us. So, and the action.
So it's really about the psychographic behaviors, how you tap into that, which is really creates brand evangelists, which is, you know, what all of us as marketers want to do. We want to create that emotional tie to a brand. And I would add, it shortens that time from first point of contact to close of business, whether that is, you know, insurance, healthcare, whatever that is. I think that's a really astute way of defining the emotional side of it. Okay, Kai, I'm going to turn to you. Do you want to define return on engagement or return on experience?
Oh, let me take the engagement.
Okay, then Tim, you know what's coming to you next, so be ready.
And that's just not rehearsed, by the way, for the audience. We didn't know which one we were getting. So for me, it's really moving a lead through the funnel via the heartstrings rather than the mind. And that means maybe turning a prospect into a client earlier, faster, and having trust in the brand or loyalty to the brand before, during, and after the purchase. And that's where the emotion can make all the difference, or the engagement.
Love it. All right, Tim, over to you for the last definition.
Sure. So, and again, to a couple of these comments, like we're trying to define these as we move along here today. So you're hearing us also doing what you're doing, trying to figure this out kind of as we move forward. With experience, I mean, take a look at the last 10 years and the mobile revolution. The average experience of a person doing a thing in a digital interface, for example, has changed dramatically. So the expectations are super high now. It's sort of like this one, I'm going to tap one time and maybe say a few words and then something magical is going to happen. Even in store now, I think there's there are traditional, like great retailers, great hotelier companies. The experience inside has been amazing. You're not really paying for it. You're not really buying it, but the experience makes it fun for you, makes it convenient. And I think now, given the new baseline in 2021, which still sounds like an episode of the Jetsons to me, 2021, we have a landscape where now consumers, which is, kind of a cheesy word, but consumers can interact with us, experience what we offer in so many different ways. They can participate without purchasing. It used to be to kind of participate, I needed to buy something from you. Now I can, quote unquote, participate. I can, read your content as I Google stuff. I can follow if it's like fashion or fun or hobby, I can follow your Instagram and get it that way. I can go to YouTube and listen to your music. I can see you, see your people on the news and the media. They can participate without buying. So that experience has tangible value, right? It extends your mind share, if you will, your relevance over time. Plus the value of the experience. And here someone had mentioned, like, what are you going to say to the senior business leaders? And I think senior business leaders would understand, if our experience is no fun, if our experience is difficult, that means everything else has to be triply great. Like your brand has to be super awesome to overcome a janky experience. Your service teams have to be awesome, and they have to be larger or able to handle more calls if your online experience is not fun. So there's your value. Two things: the ease of business, and also that relevance and personal connection over time.
Yes, for those of you who are just tuning in, janky is a very hardcore marketing term. Make sure you define it within your organization. You won't forgive us without taking that with you.
Which I learned janky from programmers too. Like it was a coder thing. Yep. Which I thought, I like that word. I'll take that. I'll run with that.
Yeah, it's defining bugs and things of that nature. So funny. I also think it's important to note that, like, all these conversations, and I think everyone really hit some important points along the definition track. But ultimately, what we now know is that, especially in this era, and we'll talk about how COVID has affected this conversation, it's 16 plus touch points before someone knows, likes, and trusts your brand at a minimum. Before, it was, depending on your price point, or your service price point, anywhere from 6 to 10, 16 plus. I mean, just think about how many micro moments, how many opportunities you have to excite and delight your audience. And I think those are the things along these three topics that are really important for us to touch upon. So with that, we're going to throw up another poll, which is, which of these three statements aligns better within your organization? Is ROE more important than ROI? Is ROI more important than ROE, or are they equally important? Please vote now. And those of us on the panel can equally vote. Ooh, it's a tough one. It's really tough, right? Okay, voting. Everyone get their votes in? We'll see what the results are. I think it's an interesting question to ask, because it's such a new, ROE is so new that we want to focus efforts on that. We always like that new shiny object, right? And ROE is that new shiny object. So it's like really exciting for us, while we know we're going to be held to ROI by the C-suite above us. So for me, it's a little bit of a challenge on both of those, but interested to hear what those tuning in have to think about that. So I'm going to ask one of the questions from the audience. Jonathan asked, oh, wait, we got the poll request back in. Okay, so 56% say they're of equal importance. Interesting. I wonder, and you can add in the chat your follow-up question to this, is that because you just don't know enough about it? Is it too new? Is that why they're of equal importance? That's kind of my assessment of it. What do you guys think on the panel?
I think they inform each other. They work in tandem.
Good point.
One, gives the ROE gives interpretation, and flavor around the ROI and helps you to make decisions, it can also create opportunities for innovation because you get feedback. It's a wrapper, I think, around the ROI.
Nice.
Yeah, I
Lynn?
like the visual of a wrapper around the ROI, two sides of a coin. I also think of it in terms of short-term and long-term. You know, your ROI, and are you how are you optimizing your investments? How are your margins looking like? You know, that tends to be, or at least being in the fundraising space, you know, the amount you're putting into a campaign and it yields.
Like those hardcore numbers you're being accounted to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those fundraising dollars. That's, you know, very short-term, immediate. That's serving an immediate need, not making light of revenue. That's important. But
of course,
the ROE, depending on the set of circumstances, and someone put that in the chat, that's lifetime value. That to me also is a longer term play. It may not pay off immediately, but over time, you're going to bet that it will, and pay off in a way that ideally can be quantified. And I think that's the trick, which is how do you start to measure that lifetime value from an
Yes, we're going to figure that all out on the call today. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
Veronica, thank you so much. We agree, obviously, that ROE increases LTV. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. And then Jonathan, I love this question. And in fact, Kai had a very specific answer. We were just talking about this right before we jumped on here, which his question is, if the goal is to demonstrate the business impact of marketing to senior management, why use an acronym that already has a well-defined meaning? Do you think that finance people think it's cute to redefine one of their own key terms? Kai, this was like, you brought this up immediately before we chatted today. I would love to hear your opinion on that.
I completely agree with that statement. Return on equity in the finance world, and if we want to be credible with our finance teams and commercial teams, then maybe it's not the best acronym. And I think we should challenge ourselves as a marketing community to come up with something new. Maybe by the end of this show, we have something all together.
No pressure. Tim, since you are in this industry, what's your thoughts on redefining ROE?
And we don't use that acronym internally. I think one of the things about what we're talking about is a return on engagement or experience or emotion. You know, the math is more complicated than ROI. ROI is, for sure, the disappointing things about ROI is it's so simplistic, kind of, you know, we've defined that the value is a conversion event. Okay. We could do ROI if we had a numerical way to, for instance, gauge long-term client health. Like it could be lifetime value, but what about client health? From a financial perspective, what about a client who's healthy and moving along? Maybe they don't do a lot of things, which actually in investing can often be the right way to go. That's that number then could be plugged into return on investment, and we could calculate the amount it takes to nurture them over time and the revenue and get there. I do think there needs to be a new word. I would, and if anybody's in finance, don't take this the wrong way. I wouldn't over-rotate to try and make the finance people feel comfortable, because they're probably looking at us as marketers with one eye scrunched shut anyway. But I think if we were able to take the framework of what we're talking about, perhaps there's a set of metrics that come out of it. And it could be that math is really dependent upon your own company or your industry. If you have a short-term consumer product cycle, that's one thing. If you have a long-term relationship cycle, like insurance or finance, that's another, right? They're very different. So how are you going to measure the value of that client who's engaged or not engaged? What are the revenue streams from that client over time? All that plays into how you want to think about it.
I could not agree more. I want to say thank you to the audience. You have so many great comments here. We are reading all of them and trying to get to as many questions as possible. You are also excited about this topic and applying it to your individual companies, talking about CX and how it applies to different types of marketing communication. Really fascinating. We have a question from Sumia, which she says, it was mentioned that younger generations are more interested in causes and how their buying and brand loyalty are connected to social impact. does marketing have realistic intersections with advocacy? And can marketing in our current age be a force for good? Ooh, that is a big question. I think that empirically, yes, that's my response to that, full stop. But obviously, Lynn and Kai, I think, have a much deeper perspective given their market. So, Lynn, I'm going to start with you.
I absolutely, yes, amplify that in a major way. Yes, marketing can be a force for good. And I do think there can be a dotted line or solid line, or however you want to put it, between marketing and advocacy, but it has to be credible. It has to be credible to who you are as a brand, whatever your brand position is in the marketplace, and to your product. I mean, you've seen it, frankly, this past year with in the wake of social injustice, George Floyd, the trial, obviously COVID, but shining a light on inequities across so many different areas of our country, systemic racism, et cetera. But I'm sure everyone is aware that a lot of brands who sort of jumped on the bandwagon, put out pithy statements, or made some attempts to tie their brand to tackling social justice, those that were not really credible or authentic, or when you peek sort of behind the curtain, if their practices or makeup of their boards or their employees spoke out or what have you, you sort of do so at your own peril. So
100%. Yep.
That's right. And that's where young people, they want you, clearly they want you to do, they're interested in how the impact of brands, but they want to make sure that you're very transparent and that you're genuine about it and not just, again, jumping on a bandwagon. So may not be for every brand or organization.
I think that's fair. And I think it's also important to note that the brands that did it the way that you said, inauthentically and just to make a statement because they thought it was what they should do, they got called to the table and it was ugly. I mean, there was a lot of really bad marketing that was happening out there. And we saw the pushback on that. And I think that they deserved every bit of that because, like you said, it needed to be authentic, organic to the organization. And do you actually walk that talk within your company? Otherwise, don't make a statement for statement's sake. Like, nobody wants to hear that, especially the younger generation, because they see right through it, which I think is a really great benefit to having Gen Z and millennials starting to really impact our decision-making processes, in the C-suite. Kai, I know you had an opinion on this as well, for sure.
Yeah, because what about this version of ROE? What about return on ethics?
Ooh, yes.
So very relevant. And actually in my company, I'm also chair of the sustainability committee. So it's something very dear to me. And I completely agree with what Lynn says about the integrity of it and that it needs to be done truthworthy and transparently. And it's super important. And is very emotional as well as all the marketing activities.
Thank you. Sumia says thank you and has a follow-up question. Are there specific pieces of advice on how a marketer can also be a genuine advocate in terms of applying those skills? So what are the steps someone needs to take? Like, if they have this emotional tie, if they feel like they want to be a voice for social good, I'm assuming, Sumia, you mean within your organization or maybe in the world as a whole, but how do they apply it and become an advocate in that category? That's a tough one, yeah.
Yeah, I would say if within your organization you see an opportunity to reach an audience segment or talk about a service or product that you have in a different way that will resonate with a group of people based on, again, whatever your particular, we talk about advocacy as one big bucket. There's so many things, obviously, you can champion. Then a bit of advice, ironically, is to create that business case.
Right.
So if it's never been done before, it represents a new approach. I'm a true believer in research, quantitative and qualitative research. I'm a true believer in crunching the numbers to think like, if we took this approach, this is what we stand to gain in understanding that and articulating that, depending on what the culture is of your organization. That could be very helpful. Making a business case is always compelling. And then the other thing I would say, and this may be more true for profits, but it could work for profits too, is what is your organization's mission? And is there a social impact or an issue that you can legitimately link to your organization's mission, or it's really and not an expansion of it, but it's within that territory that perhaps hasn't been explored. That's another way to think about how you could advocate or put forth or tap your own interest and marry that with what you're doing. Short of that, looking at all the many organizations that there are out there, I mean, foundations, nonprofits, what have you, that really tap a specific passion that you have, or starting your own, for goodness sake. Lots of people have side hustles. So
it's true.
Yeah.
She said it's for her career in her career. So that was great advice. Tim, you unmuted, looked like you had something you wanted to add to that conversation as well.
Yeah, I would say to Samia, some of it too is, be true to yourself and walk the walk. Don't be afraid to walk the walk and be who you are. There's a lot of performative stuff that happens, especially in large organizations, and that could be performative for supporting social justice, but it can also be performative about wanting to be a climber and succeed in the organization and adopting a particular way of behavior. So I think one of the keys these days is to be true to who you are. And if these things are dear to your heart, express them in a way that's positive, and every chance. Lynn's advice is completely on point. Wherever you get a chance, put the wedge in and try and advance what you think is the right thing to do. And if you look at it from a business perspective, that can happen. But yeah, I think there's a lot of, I was going to say, with this, what happened over the past year in a lot of these companies, I feel like it was performative from their perspective, and they didn't really know what to do. And I think it was very difficult for people to decide, do I say something or not? And maybe to your point, Lynn, the thing was to not say something. Right? Sometimes silence is a better action than speaking when you don't have much to say. And it was very interesting to watch. And I think that that's the hard topic around advocacy. How real is it for your organization as a whole, and how far do they go? So I just wanted to add that. It felt like that was something that had popped into my head when I was watching over the course of last summer.
I love this conversation. I think it's just even having conversations like this and knowing that there are people like you out there, Samia, who are passionate in whatever category that is. And the truth is that now is the time for these conversations, right? Like, organizations are building up D&I within their big orgs. So this is a great opportunity for you to go in, if you're looking for a new career path, to go in under those kinds of initiatives and say, this is the path I want to forge within your organization. And having tough conversations around that is really helpful. Matt also added in something from the AMA, actually. The Journal of Marketing just published a special issue that explores marketing as a force for good from different perspectives, and there is a link there. So highly recommend you check that out. But I absolutely love this conversation. And since we're talking about the pandemic and how this has impacted all of us, and for good or for bad, do we believe that it's because of the pandemic that we are now having to have these more emotional conversations? Is it chicken and egg? Was this always going to come about? Or is it because we are now in such emotional states almost all the time? Like, we could be crying one day, laughing the next, happy, sad, all over the map. Is that the reason why ROE has become a part of this conversation?
Well, I think it certainly is a factor. I just don't see how you could take it out of the mix. Is it the sole reason? Probably not. I'm sure the seeds were sown, so to speak, or planted before we embarked on this crazy, unprecedented year. But as you mentioned, I think there's, without a doubt, much more of a focus. Everyone's doing soul searching. You personally, within your career, and as just in your life, companies are organizations are all doing soul searching. I mean, this has upended everything. And it's interesting. We at LS have been having a lot of conversations about, like so many others, what's going to happen when you return to work, et cetera. And being a health organization, clearly we're very tapped into, have physicians and psychologists who are part of the staff. And to make a long story short, someone was saying that, the reality is when everyone emerges, we have to realize that the whole country's been through a trauma. To your point, Laurel, about crying one minute and laughing the next. It's as if we
Asking
all
for a friend on that one, but
yeah.
not me.
But we might have sort of collective PTSD, to be honest with you. Like we've been in survival mode, and then once you come out of that, you can't help to feel some of the repercussions. So I think it's only natural that this, because you are going through these emotional challenges, your teams are going through emotional challenges, whatever those might be, that ROE is now, that three-dimensional picture we've been talking about, takes even more weight.
I think that's fair. We've launched another poll. Please make sure you answer that poll. We want to know what you think about that. And as we're answering that poll, want to move back up. I did not get to a question from a gentleman named Bartholomew, which I absolutely love that name, by the way. I feel like I should have an ascot and a martini in my hand talking to you. And he asked, are all industries in need of understanding of ROE? What about government and defense? So Tim, I think this is actually a really good question for you, since your industry tends to be on the drier side. You are definitely not within that category, but is there a difference in terms of the type of industry that this needs to be applied to?
It's interesting. I mean, I used to do some work for the business to business side at Schwab, and that type of selling is totally emotional too, and it's very similar. It's about engagement and trust. So I don't want to veer off into the political. I would say, though, that a firm or an organization that has a huge constituency and there is an implied and actually explicit contract of service, such as the government, return on engagement is probably really important for that type of organization, because you are there to serve a certain client group. And I think that kind of servant mindset can be applied in many different ways, but certainly if you're in that position, I think it's really important. If you think about the military, it's an interesting concept, maybe in their supplier relationships, but perhaps you might think internally, what's the ROE for the soldiers? So totally. That's a very different employment relationship for many, many ways. But any large organization should be thinking about that. With the military, that might be an area that somebody could investigate. It might be useful. How are you engaging? How are you? What is the experience for the people who are working for you? And especially in that type of a fraught environment, first responders come to mind, healthcare, places where people willingly put themselves at risk. I think that's where someone could do some investigations and find some use.
That's exactly what I was thinking as you started to answer that question. Was we've been talking about this outwardly facing ROE, the customer, the consumer, right? But we didn't talk about how this is turned inward into our own organizations and our organizational structure. And I think that there is another massive opportunity to measure all three of these things within our organizations. Have any of you started to do that internally, or is it still such a new conversation that we're still ROE externally looking at the consumers? Has anyone had Kai, anything?
Yeah, I think it's super important in leadership to lead with emotion. And to go back to an example in my career, when I worked for one of the large fast food companies around the world, you probably all know, we had a goal at the time. The business goal was to put as many fast food outlets on the planet as possible, as quickly as possible. How do you get your team rallied around this goal? So instead of bringing the 100 managers together that came to a conference every year, instead of sitting in a meeting room for 3 days going through PowerPoint slides, we actually took them onto a barren landscape and threw the gauntlet down and said, we are going to build a fast food restaurant together in the next 24 hours. Wow. And 100 workers came, engineers, architects, and helped all the management team of that company to build a restaurant within 24 hours. The press was then invited, the mayor of the local area cut the ribbon, and fast food was served to everyone. No one was sleeping. It was 24 hours working. It was well prepared, but it was an internal motivation campaign. But it's one that everyone who was on that team is still talking about, 15 or so years later. So you captured everyone's hearts around this, being in the trenches together to do something amazing, unforgettable. And it was, though, in line with the strategy of the company. And it was then taken to the press and, made something out of it more than internal. So it was really an internal engagement campaign, but it had an external effect as well.
Interesting. That could have gone really, really badly.
Yeah,
as a marketer, that makes me sweat just thinking about it. My goodness.
I must share a video with you one day. We made a video at the time.
Amazing. I think it's a really good point, which is that there's no like specific lines in the sand between internal, external media, all of that. There's a blurring of the lines, especially in this day and age. And so I think this ROE conversation by necessity has to be, both internal and external. So I love that that's the message that you have. So let's talk about how we're defining it or how we're measuring it rather. We talked about the definition. We've answered some questions from the audience. Please keep those coming in. We've put up some polls. I think the responses have not been shocking. The only one that was surprising to me, and I would love to hear if you guys thought this as well, was that ROE and ROI were kind of equally as important to everyone on the panel. I thought that was really interesting. But the truth is, like, how do we actually measure? If someone were to watch this conversation, go back to their teams and say, guys, ROE is what we need to be focusing on, and here's how we're going to do it. Do we have measurable steps? Do you have measurable steps within your organization and steps that we can offer in terms of actually executing on that? Because I would be at a loss personally. And answer the poll if you are currently measuring. We'll be very impressed if those of you on the call are already measuring these, because again, this is a very nascent conversation. So I think that we're all, to Tim's point, kind of discovering this together along the way. I did a whole lot of research on this and very curious to hear, are you measuring it? Lynn, looked like you unmuted.
Well, we haven't quite cracked the code. I'm just going to say that up front. But we're figuring out, and we think we may be on to something. And what I mean by that is, our organization being a nonprofit, a major priority, surprise is driving revenue, which is fundraising dollars. And every year we start at zero. And so that's absolutely critical to our ability to deliver on a mission. And for a long time, the metric for determining success in marketing was based on ROI. What's the cost of conversion, getting someone to become a fundraiser, how much marketing, advertising spend, and what does that yield in terms of dollars raised, et cetera. But over the past year or two, we've been shifting and really thinking of making this pivot towards, or my team, I've been steering them to pivot on the emotion, that level of engagement. And I guess a perfect example is last October, we were on TikTok. We did a TikTok activation around, it was Blood Cancer Awareness Month. And 5 finger, I don't know, for those of you might know, was big on TikTok for a while. You put down put up, your 5 fingers if you can answer yes to all these questions. And we had a young man in his early 20s who organically created I'm going to botch the term, but sort of a paired TikTok in response to our activation. Very charismatic. He was a 3-time leukemia survivor. And so my social team reached out to him and heard his story and wanted to elevate his story. And we did that around Giving Tuesday. He's 22, 23. He had documented his whole journey of treatment and whatnot, and we worked with him to put together content that chronicled his journey, but how he had triumphed. And as it turned out that one of the treatments that was life-saving for him was one that we as an organization had invested in that innovative research trial.
Wow, that's so amazing.
he told his story, and he told his story of his connection to LLS. But it was the most, in this age of, doing it through Zoom calls and whatnot, it was by far, I think, the most raw type of video pieces of content that we had created, but it was by far the most compelling. We broke that into various pieces of content, and I have to say, it drove to 8 times, 10 times the level of engagement. And by engagement, I mean click-throughs, comments, shares, etc. His content, and that relationship with him has since grown over time. So this past month, March, we used him. Well, not used him, but used some of that content and stories to drive fundraising, direct giving. We saw increases over current donors and prospect donors more so than any other piece of content that we used. So I used him as an example because what started off as an engagement, he was engaging with us over a TikTok, 5-finger. And then we interacted with him, told his story, and his story resonated emotionally, powerfully, so that now it caused another level of engagement. Ideally, we're seeking to foster and continue that relationship with them over time, but that to me is an example of the lifetime value of that relationship with this young man. It's hard to quantify what it is. We're beginning to see some metrics to quantify it, but I think it's going to, without a doubt, if it continues on this momentum, it's going to build over time and be quite powerful. And it started with we'll just do a TikTok activation, see if what happened, what comes of it.
First of all, Karen says it's called a duet. So thank you, Karen, for setting us straight on that one.
My daughter would be mortified that I didn't know that. Thank you, Karen.
I had no clue, Lynn. Don't worry. You are in very good company. I'm sure did anyone on this panel know the answer to that? I wouldn't think so. So a couple of things there. One, that it's a duet. Two, it sounds like you're still going back to what we are currently measuring as metrics for that engagement. So, and the response to the poll was that 90% of people are still not measuring ROE. So I wonder if this is just a marketing term, like this is the new hot guy on the block, right? Or hot kid on the block in terms of marketing jargon, but it's going to eventually come back to just measuring the same stuff that we've been measuring time over time. I don't know.
Well, it's interesting because certainly the engagement with him has resulted in, we've seen ROI metrics, but there's also a separate, the nature of the relationship with him is such that there's a lifetime value to that dynamic. And we're trying to figure out how do we measure that? He's made an impact. Yeah. It's worth the investment of time to continue cultivating the relationship with him for a whole host of reasons. But that's something we're quite honestly haven't quite figured out yet.
And that's why I love this conversation, because I think probably a lot of people tuned in and they were like, I don't even know what ROE is. So I think that it's really important for everyone who is still with us to know that we're all figuring this out too. That this is just something that's new and interesting and dynamic, and it's kind of a moving target. Kai, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's something that they call the net emotional value, which is basically so NEV, net emotional value, which is where you take all your positive emotions and subtract the negative emotions from your clients. It works very similar than the net promoter score that
right.
everyone is aware of. So that's the same for the emotional side. We've done something really neat recently, which is to, and maybe you have done this all already for a long time and I'm just new to it, but we've connected our results from LinkedIn and Twitter, etc., the shares, the likes and all that, the results of that by client onto salesforce.com. So our CRM and our channels, social channels, get reported together. So we can actually see by client what have they liked, what have they shared, what have they commented on, which is fantastic for our account managers and salespeople because they can see you know, where the customer is, how do they feel about the things that we're putting out there.
Interesting. So you tied your sales program in with your listening software to have an end emotional score. I love that. Of course, Kai, you would have an answer to this question. I'm not surprised at all. Tim, looked like you had something to add as well.
I'm just going to say that, you know, we develop these things in steps, and one way to think about it is maybe it doesn't replace ROI, but maybe what you do is you explain how experience, engagement, and emotion contribute. And I think that what we're doing is trying to lay out that framework, and so try and quantify what happens when people are more engaged with a multi-touch journey, for example, how people's value kind of moves over time, and it's a long game. I think that's the challenge, is that, I don't know, I mean, we do monthly reporting and quarterly reporting, and everybody wants to have a new number on the chart. And it could be that you're not going to see anything from a particular subsegment or a group of people for a long time. So still charting what they're doing, and being aware that it's going to take a long time, and have that kind of discussion with the folks above you or adjacent, I think that can help, because it really is the long view. And that's not how we're oriented, I think, in business a lot of times. I think,
especially right now, we want it right now.
Yeah, I mean, I want Amazon to deliver me something I didn't even know I wanted yesterday. But I think it's sort of like it's the soda pop of marketing metrics, the ROI. And I think we measure it and we report it because we can measure it, which is just the second thing I was going to say. We have to be careful we measure what matters, and that can be really complicated. So again, I'm more like, I don't go above and put out all these theories. I kind of Trojan horse it and start small and move forward. But I think for your organization or your group, what are the things that you think matter? Watch those over time. Do something simple like hold out some type of control, see what you get. And you'll be able to tell, I think, over 2-4 quarters, is there revenue impact, even if it's small. And then all of a sudden you've got that, okay, there's a financial connection to these other things we're doing. And those could be the value of social engagement. It could be the whole TikTok thing with the duet and all of those metrics. Like that's kind of fizzy and in the moment, but you're talking about long-term value there. So yeah, keep track of it and then try and prove the case. I think that's where we sort of have to go. It's hard to, build this new metric right now because there's too many disparate parts.
I love your Trojan horse perspective on that. That's really funny. And we have talked about in our notes a bit about developing a framework. So there is a framework called CARE, C-A-R-E, and it goes like this: connection, which is introduction, resource sharing, and invitation; amplification, so cross-posting across digital spaces that are tied to the brand; recognition, which is gratitude, celebration, shout out, success stories; and then empathy, acknowledgement, and understanding. So there is a framework that is starting to be developed around ROE. I don't think there are real metrics tied to that yet, but some of those numbers are what things that I think we're already measuring, especially as it relates to the social space. So I guess the question is, does that CARE framework make sense? And what part of it, if any, are you guys most excited about?
Well, for me, it's definitely the empathy in care, because we're a healthcare company, and with what you said earlier on about the pandemic, I think it's important to be empathetic, and hence you could turn again here. I come up with another one. ROE could be return on empathy. As well. And one kind of phrase that springs to mind came from one of your presidents, Teddy Roosevelt: people do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so that resonates, and care is one of our company values as well. And we have 2 emotional values and 2 functional values. And we have a matrix where we have our 4 values on. to the right, to the left, in terms of one side is emotional, one side is rational, a bit like your brain has two sides, emotional and rational. And for example, our company photography, we sit it on that metrics, depending on if we want to be more emotional, more rational, depending on what it is for and what we are trying to do with it. So, we have certain tools that we're using to express empathy.
Anyone else care to weigh in? See what I did there?
Yeah, I would, similarly to Kai, as a health organization, empathy is without a doubt part of our DNA. And particularly over this past year, where we've had patients and their families who are even more vulnerable and at risk than ever before, just because of the nature of the virus, the pandemic. But the other piece I would say that was important for us is the acknowledgement. I'm cheating a little bit. The recognition. We are, like so many nonprofits, reliant on volunteers, people who are just donating their time, either to fundraise for us or help with events, or even help build capacity and are embedded in certain departments. And so we, again, certainly part of our DNA is showing our appreciation and on our daily basis, I should say, to our volunteers who are extraordinary in many ways, and actually make our ability to deliver on our mission possible, if not for them. And having work come from other nonprofit organizations, the Girl Scouts, Red Cross, that are very volunteer centric, that typically is a component that different than certainly the corporate or for-profit world. But it means so much when people are giving time away from family, friends, work, just as invested as a staff person. And it's those signs of acknowledgement and recognition that really mean so much and go a long way.
So warm and fuzzy. I love it. I really love this framework. I think it makes me feel good. Whether this is going to be the long term how we measure, I don't know, but it sure makes me feel really good about being a marketer. How about you, Tim?
It does. I mean, I think it's funny. This is a wonderful framework for how you work within your own company, or how you work with your agencies. How do you get the best out of that team? The first three, I think, are really about the digital behavior between zeros and ones in content, the ping-ponging back and forth. I feel like the empathy is something that often the communicator needs to express. And that brings to mind, too, something that is part of the training at Schwab, and it's also something that we do from time to time. It happened to me pretty early on in my career. We listened to actual client phone calls, and we listened to client phone calls where someone's spouse had just passed away, and we heard what that was like, and we heard the phone rep talk this person through the initial details. And I came from a non-finance background. Math was not my thing in school. That blew open for me what it meant to be communicating to somebody about that topic, because it's not about just a bunch of numbers. It's about someone's life and their livelihood and their dreams and their aspirations and their plans. And so I think that's another useful nugget of what you're talking about, especially when you were mentioning that, Lynn and Kai. Don't be afraid to dive into the emotions of wherever you work. Dive into the emotions of those quote unquote consumer relationships, because they don't help you then. We talked about walking the walk a little while ago. That'll help you walk the walk, because you'll be connected with where those people are. I think that's maybe empathy is maybe the biggest superpower, like right now in the marketer toolkit. Explore that as much as possible.
I love that. Still warm and fuzzy. I do want to give some other frameworks, because we have a lot of things to cover still in a short amount of time, but there is a definition within the market about how to define return on experience. And it is the net value of benefits divided by the cost of the investment times 100. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone, but I do know that Joanne mentioned that she believed that CX was really important. And if the customer was getting a great experience, that it impacted sales, and there was a real crossover in CX and ROX. And in fact, we have a bunch of recommendations in our framework for improving return on experience, which is fusing those two. So how do you go about, or how are you thinking about fusing CX and EX? So the customer experience and the emotional experience, or the return on that emotional experience. Is there a way to invest in and deliver a superior experience within each of your organizations? And is that measurable? I know these are really big questions. Kai, you want to take that one?
I can offer an activity that we've done, but we haven't measured it into the nth degree. But let me just share with you how this activity came about. So we have a call center, which we call the Assistance Center, and we actually have 27 of them around the world, where people can ring us from an incident, anything from a broken tooth to a heart attack to a terror situation, or wanting information on COVID-19. So calls come in from all around the world, but essentially it looks like a call center. And we have, when times were better and you could actually go to the offices, we would show clients around the call center very proudly, because we are very proud of what we do. But it came across perhaps sometimes a bit dull, and didn't bring across all the life-saving, the protecting and saving lives that our teams do day in and day out. So we tried to be better at storytelling and bringing the emotion across, and hence we actually brought in a Shakespearean actor to train our Assistance Center staff on how to storytell and share just simply what we do day in and day out, but share it in a way that's dramatic and interesting, and walk across the floor in a certain way, in a certain order. And you would lower your voice when you come to a certain place, because there's people doing very important work, and and then raise the voice again, and the inflections, and so, and all of a sudden the visit to the Assistance Center became super exciting. And so what we are saying, we turned the Assistance Center tour into an Assistance Center experience by just working that through. Have we measured if it's successful or not? No. But we've made the effort to look at it and make it much more interesting and emotional for anyone to visit, and to get the real stuff. It's real stuff. We just didn't bring it across well enough, and now we do.
That's fascinating. I mean, I think at our hearts, we're all storytellers, right? We're storytellers, and we have to storytell in a way that differentiates what we do in a very, very crowded marketplace, which is why I also think this is such an interesting conversation. Any other stories like that? I love that, because you would not think that a call center would be something that would be able to be fascinating. I just think that that's a really interesting story. You guys all have such great stories. The listening in on the phone calls, and we know that we give you our permission for you to do that. So just let's limit our liabilities there. And then the 5-finger TikTok story, the emotional draw that you guys have pulled out of all of these has been so fascinating. What are you guys going to do next with this information? I think we've all done a lot of homework and research on these topics. We can see that 90% of our audience isn't actually measuring this yet. What are your plans, if any?
I will say I was very intrigued by the marrying of social listening tools with Salesforce. And as we are in the midst of deploying Salesforce, not just nationally, but we have 27 regional locations as well. And so we're investing quite a bit in consolidating, streamlining, cleaning up data, et cetera. So I will definitely bring that up to my partner in crime on the IT side of the house, because I think that would be quite valuable and interesting for us to pursue. And it's also heartening frankly, to say that everyone's just trying to figure it out. I mean, that
totally
is the benefit of us hopefully for the people who've tuned into this, and for us as participants, sharing these stories so we can figure out what does make sense for our organization. Because I think as painful as this year and challenging as this year has been for so many people, there's a certain sense of liberation that's come with it too, because it allows us the space to say, well, hey, let's give it a shot. Why not? You know, I think everyone's sort of much more willing to take risks and try something, even if it and you're going to get something even if it quote unquote fails. So now's the time, frankly, to not just have these conversations, but to act on them, because I think in general there's a lot more leeway and forgiveness to figure it out.
I totally agree. Yeah, everyone's just figuring it out, as in life. I do a lot of nonprofit work myself, and I do with a lot of kids, and whenever they ask me like, what's the number one thing I need to know about how to be in business, and I tell them, everyone's faking it. Everyone is just trying to figure it out, and we're showing that on this panel, right? Like, we are all senior level executives within our organizations. We have been in this marketing world for a really long time, and we're still figuring out some of these more nuanced approaches to how to measure customer success and emotion and engagement and all those things. Tim, how about you? Any takebacks that you're gonna go back to your organization with?
I mean, I think that it just kind of confirms where we're headed on our journey, which is we are trying to simultaneously like improve and amplify these engagement experiences, which in our parlance means they're not product centric. So it truly is about our best efforts where the client is and lead them along a journey. So we're trying to validate that, and we're testing, and hopefully, fingers crossed, knock on wood, in 6 to 12 months, we'll show that has a statistically significant impact, right? But I think that the second thing that I'm taking away here, there are a couple ideas about social integration, which is a whole nother like planet at Schwab, so I can dig into there. But I think too, just that dialing in on at every moment, are you making this experience, simple and engaging and relevant for that person? I mean, I think I heard the other day we get subjected to, well, it's kind of a pejorative term. We received 3,000 plus advertisement messages per day. That's probably including paid search and organic search, which kind of isn't fair. But anyway, a lot of traffic, right? People's time is valuable now. So even if it's an email, what's the best way to help them move to the next decision? And we really focus on that. I try and think of, the person with 2 or 3 children who's looking at their personal email at 9:30 at night, probably doesn't want to, maybe has a glass of wine, right? Would rather be binging something on Netflix than have to go through this email, and they get something about finance. Can I make them worry less? If they have this need, can I help them get to the next spot with ease? If they have no need for it, at least maybe it's not horrible and it doesn't make them mad. At least maybe they go, oh, Schwab sent me something interesting, cool, and they go out to something else. So just dialing in on that. And I think that goes back to engagement and emotion and experience versus, oh, I need this sucker to convert. I want a big, giant red convert button and they're going to buy. Well, maybe that works in the conversion funnel, but maybe not so much in an engagement framework.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And I mean, ultimately, it comes down to what is the pain point that you're solving? That's what we're doing as marketers, right? I think that is a really perfect example of that. For those of you still tuned in, what questions haven't we asked that you want to know answers to about this type of marketing, this nuanced conversation that we're having? I think I've been asking a lot of questions. What are the words that are most impactful from this conversation? Is storytelling still important to you in this emotional state? Do we feel like this is an unfair conversation because we're currently in COVID? I guess that's a really interesting question, right? What do you guys think? Is it fair, unfair that we get to tie into people's emotions far more easily, I guess, because we're in a more emotional state? Thoughts? Okay.
Well, I think it just makes our responsibility so much bigger and more important to, because you can't, use it for the wrong reasons. You have to be very sensitive to that situation. I think it offers a lot of opportunity, but also it's a huge responsibility and needs to be thought through. And you need to find the right tone and do it gently. I think it's more about whispering right now and not shouting. I think from a marketing point of view.
I would agree. Anyone else have any thoughts as my puppy comes to say hello to everyone?
No, I just would agree with what Kai said. Everything that she said, your ethical, what's your compass and how you're going to navigate. You're right. Because you don't want to, to this point about emotions and engagement, it's about trust. And so, especially because people are so vulnerable and perhaps more predisposed to, as someone was saying, heartstrings, what have you, you don't want to betray that or certainly take advantage of it. So,
about being sensitive. Kim?
We have a situation where we're in the middle of a pandemic and the markets have been crazy up. So, I don't think it's appropriate to be like, yeah, it's awesome, because people are being affected by this pandemic. At the same time, can be good news for individuals. I think the thing early on we contracted some research about the pandemic, and it was one of those, slap your head moments. Everyone's pandemic is personal, and it really depends on so many factors that are impossible from a Salesforce Marketing Cloud data analytics segmentation approach. I don't think you can be that granular. So I think, to Kai's point, recognize that. Tread lightly. Don't over rotate on how horrible it is. We all saw that. How I was getting these like pandemic emails in, I don't know, May or June of last year, and I was like,
in these uncertain times, I'm like,
I know, and I'm like, I'm at home. I've been home for 3 months. But I think, tread lightly and remember that people's experience is very, very personal, and the subject matter or context of whatever you're communicating. The more personal and the more potentially positive and negative it is, the lighter we have to tread, the smarter we have to be.
I think it's about trust. And I think that that's our responsibility, as Kai said as well. And I also think that it's interesting because the newest trend in marketing is everyone's talking about personalization, right? And so to your point, Tim, like this ties perfectly into that conversation. How do we tie that emotional tie-in in a respectful, trust-building way with this personalization that might make you feel like, oh my God, I get served ads if I've just spoken something into the universe now. It's just crazy. Like the cross-section of that is just wild. Yeah. Anthony says that he's in the entertainment industry and they use ROEs all the time, and that it really helps with their audience curation. That's interesting. So using it to help segment via emotion, is that what you're doing, Anthony? I think that's a really, really interesting part of the conversation. I would love to hear how you're doing that. And we're going to throw up one more poll, I think probably the last poll of the day, which is, after this marketing panel, are you likely to make more effort to look at your ROI, report on your ROI, or connect KPIs to ROI? So answer now, please. And submit. This has been such a great conversation. We only have a few minutes left. Are there questions that we haven't answered about ROE? I feel like we've covered a lot of groundwork, but my perspective as an agency is very different than your perspectives as brands. Is there something else that we haven't covered in this conversation that you guys want to talk about in terms of ROE? I'm going to leave like an open forum. We've covered quite a bit today, I know. And you guys have shared so many great stories. This has been so interesting. It's also really interesting to hear how few people actually knew what the heck this was to begin with, right?
I have another thought connected to storytelling, Laurel. We created an e-learning course actually on storytelling and gave it to our marketing team to do, and also for the sales team actually equally. So that also helps a little bit, because sometimes you know what you want to do, but you don't know how to do it. So you need to help people with that.
That's interesting. So that's really a conversation around how organizations are by nature very siloed, and how the ROE conversation really marries all of those across every single segment of your organization. Now that's going to be really challenging to measure, I think. So I think we've done a lot of work today. I hope everyone's gotten their questions answered. There we go. Okay, great. I think what this has really uncovered for me, and I'm open to your interpretation of it as well, is that people are still not really clear on ROE and what it does and how it's measured and what it can positively have in terms of impact from their organization from a marketing perspective. Is that are the numbers that have come in from these polls eye-opening to you? Because I think they were to me. I thought I was the only one. Like when Esther and the team reached out and they're like, "You're going to do a panel on ROE versus ROI," I was like, "What is ROE? Am I the only one that doesn't know this?" And I had to go do my homework. I was like, "Oh, absolutely, I got this," you know. But did you guys know about this before this conversation? Has this been an eye-opening dialogue for you? Lots of shaking heads.
No, it's funny because the whisper and did I miss something? I was talking to members of my team a couple of days ago to say, I'm participating in this panel now. Have you heard about this? Or, you know, and they're like, no, tell us when you get back from the panel. So I share your, you know, not being mystified. I'm glad that this is coming up as a point of conversation in the industry. I'm glad that we're taking a look at it and as I said, figuring it out in real time. I think that's great. And obviously we'll see how it evolves. I mean, I'm definitely going to take this back to my team though, and we're going to noodle on it, brainstorm on it, and see what we can come up with.
Definitely. Well, with that, I think I'm going to start to wind down the conversation and pass it to each of you for your kind of final words of wisdom around what lessons you've learned in this conversation, how you're going to apply this to your own company, and how those tuning in might apply it to theirs. Tim, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, final words of wisdom. Well, I think, you know, think big and start small. So little steps. I think, again, that I think everyone's trying to measure this in different ways, and it depends on your business and your context. So I think thinking through what are the most important things that you want to measure and how your product or service operates in someone's life is really important. I mean, you can think Kai and Lynn are closer together, but even then it's very different. I'm off over here, off the screen with the finance nerd. You might be in consumer products. You might be a teaching platform. So I think that's what's really important. The bottom line probably is the same. Oh man, we lost him. That was his mic drop moment. He was just
going to that's the cliffhanger.
Total cliffhanger. Hopefully he'll be able to rejoin. Lynn, since you're unmuted, I'm going to pass the mic to you.
I'm going to go with, because we're in this moment of people trying to figure out a whole host of things, I would say take some risks here and test, experiment and test, and test responsibly, of course, but test and take the data and see what you can learn from it. Again, from things that have worked well or things that haven't worked well. There's value in the learning process, and I guess we refer to it as a growth mindset. I think that's really important to do during this time period. And what Tim was saying about thinking about your respective business and your audience and what's going to make the most sense for that particular situation. I don't think there's a cookie cutter approach here, basically. You have to do.
I think that's totally fair.
And Kai certainly inspired me. I love that story about building a fast food restaurant in 24 hours and thinking, what can we possibly do? I love that intersection between your mission or brand purpose and then getting employees rallied in a really bold way. That was very inspiring. Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree.
People will forget what you did, but they will never forget what you made them feel.
Yes, such an important quote. Any final? Was that your final word of wisdom? Because it is a fabulous final word.
From that one.
Amazing. Well, we had such a great conversation today. I think for me the takeaway is that we're still all figuring it out, and we're figuring it out together, just like we're figuring out our way through this really strange experience. But that we are all human, right? I think that's the baseline for this entire conversation, is that the human element is so critically important to all of us. And it's our responsibility, it's our joy, it's our honor to be able to market in ways that make change possible. Whether you're working in nonprofit or for profit, or whether you're just figuring out the direction of your career path, you can see that even as the C-suite that we are, we're still figuring it out as well. And it's such an important conversation, and you are not alone. We are all in this together, and hopefully we can tie in that emotional draw for forever. I think that this is a really important and valuable conversation, and I'm so honored to have been able to host this with my amazing panel, and to Tim, who's off in the ether somewhere, Kai and Lynn. I mean, you've just been so phenomenal. Words of wisdom, so many great stories. I mean, your businesses, your organizations are by nature very emotional, and so I think your perspectives on this were just so lovely and poignant, and I appreciate your time. So thank you for giving me the opportunity and the honor to host today.
Thank you.
Thank you for meeting you all, and I thought the audience was fantastic. So
Yeah.
Yes.
Great contributions and questions.
Such great feedback. And with that, Esther, I think we're going to pass it back to you.
Thank you very much, Laurel, Tim, Kai, and Lynn, for such an engaging discussion, and much appreciation to our partners, Reuters Events and Giving Book. Before we finish this session, I just share the link. Please let us know your thoughts, share your feedback, so we can keep improving your event experience. And as a reminder, next Thursday from 6 to 7 p.m., join us for a virtual happy hour and engage in small group conversations about issues in healthcare marketing, the state of marketing in the beginning of 2021, and other topics. Thank you all very much for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.